Hillel, what was the record of anti-Israel resolutions in 2014?
Well, about 50% of the resolutions were against Israel. Yes. Unrelated. Most of the resolutions are automatic. The resolutions are often the same ones adopted every year. We had an extra one in August in July because of the Gaza war, but most of the resolutions are adopted every March, and they're automatic, the same ones every year, and it's a very much a ritual, autopilot kind of system.
And last week, a man was burned alive by the Islamic State. Every day, children, women, non-Muslims, and gays are being abused in the name of Islam. There seems to be a blatant contradiction between Sharia laws and human rights, but the former are gaining ground all over the world. And yet, political correctness and pluralism make it difficult to act. Will the UN do anything to preserve Western culture and its sanity?
Well, you're asking a very important question. We're having these massacres around the world. The Boko Haram in Nigeria, Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, killing hundreds of people and beheading captives from Japan and from America, England, and so forth. And in fact, we're having Islamic attacks around the world. We're having in the streets of Paris and Belgium and other unrelated groups of radical Islam in Pakistan, people going into a school and killing hundreds of children. And these things are happening around the world. And the question is, where is the world body? The world body is the United Nations. Where is the United Nations to address what is a world problem? And the answer is, well, it's two answers. A, they're nowhere. In terms of fighting back and giving a strong response, I would say for the most part they're nowhere. Some exceptions. The Security Council has made some statements, but my statements in terms of action, yes. Well, but let's talk about statements, because I think where I am, I'm in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and that is a place that has no power to send troops on the ground, but it does send messages, and those are significant. And to begin with, you have to say the right things. What you said before, that political correctness or ideas of multiculturalism or pluralism are preventing certain governments and others from saying the truth. This is an issue that the Human Rights Council should be addressing. The fact that there's a radical Islam is attacking women and children around the world, and there is a cancer on the part of this religion. Doesn't mean the whole religion. It doesn't mean 1 billion Muslims, but around the world there is this radical, violent strain, and it is attacking people around the world. So what we ought to see, if things were done objectively and impartially, is for the Human Rights Council to hold an emergency session. We should have had 10 emergency sessions this year for Boko Haram, for Pakistan, for Paris, Charlie Hebdo. We've had nothing. And they should say, there is a problem. And there's something called radical Islam, and here's the problem. But on the contrary, they don't do this, but on the contrary, worse. They say you're not allowed to talk about it. If you write something, if you do a cartoon to make fun of it, to write about it, I mean, the cartoons are making fun of the terrorists and are identifying a problem. They say if you talk about it, you're insulting Islam, you're defaming Islam, you are engaging in Islamophobia. And for 10 years at the Human Rights Council, we had resolutions saying Islamophobia is prohibited, defaming Islam is prohibited. Wait a minute. Human rights is about the individual, about the individual's freedom of speech, the individual's freedom of religion. Human rights doesn't protect a religion. Human rights doesn't protect any belief system. There's no human rights violation if someone criticizes Islam. And yet, for 10 years, that's what the Human Rights Council said. So things were being turned on their head, and the Human Rights Council not only failed miserably to do anything to confront radical Islam, but on the contrary, they encouraged them. And if you take the case of Hezbollah and Hamas, every time that they attacked Israel with thousands of rockets against civilians, the Human Rights Council called emergency sessions and set up commissions of inquiry to condemn Israel, which only encourages Hamas and Hezbollah to do it again. When Hamas did this war, in their minds, they knew that the battlefront was their rockets against Tel Aviv, but they knew that helping them were human rights groups that would echo their propaganda, and the UN, which would similarly echo and support their propaganda. And so this is the problem that we're facing.
Israel is fighting two main battles on the UN front today. The one against the unilateral establishment of the Palestinian state and the legal battle for its so-called war crimes in Gaza. What is UN Watch doing in both battlefields?
Well, the first one being statehood.
Yes.
Yeah, well, statehood at the UN is, I'd say, to a significant degree has been decided. They're not a member state of the United Nations, but the United Nations has declared Palestine a state. So I would say that on that battle at the UN, Israel lost. It never had a chance, but it lost to some degree that battle. Again, Palestine is still not considered a member state, but the UN declared that it's a state. Then where we have now a major battle is at the International Criminal Court. This so-called state of Palestine. It's not a state. Abbas, in fact, controls a few cities, and even then, he has limited control of Ramallah and Jenin and Nablus and Bethlehem. He has no control over Gaza, and he has no control over most of the West Bank. And if the IDF would not be supporting him, he would fall in a minute, as what happened when Israel left Gaza. Within a short time, the Fatah fell and Hamas took over. So the idea that he controls a state is preposterous. But the United Nations declared this preposterous thing, and much of the world is going along with it. America is not. And America told the ICC and Ban Ki-moon they are not a state. This is not true, but the world goes along with it. And so now the ICC, Abbas signed the Rome Statute. He accepted jurisdiction of the criminal court. And the prosecutor announced that she said that she does this automatically whenever a country accepts jurisdiction. And he invited her to investigate the events from the summer, beginning on June 13th. He said... the prosecutor announced, the woman, she said that she will now begin an examination of what happened in Gaza. We now have a preliminary examination going on. It could last many years. In terms of what UN Watch is doing, our battle for now is at the United Nations. Our battle concerns this current commission of inquiry, which was headed by William Schabas. And we are working to counter the big lie of this inquiry. The inquiry was created in a resolution, S21/1 from this summer, where Israel was condemned 18 times and Hamas was condemned 0 times. So this is a completely false and one-sided resolution. We're a terrorist group that sent thousands of rockets to Israel, and I was in Israel during the war, sent thousands of rockets at Israeli civilians, and Israel responded to defend itself and did whatever it could to avoid harming civilians. And the big lie at the UN is that Israel is the guilty party here, and the terrorist group is the victim. And our mission is to expose this big lie. And one of the things we did was to expose Schabas. Thankfully, last week he resigned because of information that he did paid legal work for the PLO. And we're going to continue to examine very carefully the work of this commission. And the day that they present the report on 23 March, we will be there to respond.
And the next step is
well, this report will be sent to the prosecutor in The Hague, and the prosecutor will receive a lot of information, and this will be part of the information that they will receive. And our role will be to offer a counter narrative, certainly to what the Human Rights Council is saying on this issue, which we haven't seen the report. Maybe the report will be somewhat more fair because Schabas is gone, but we shouldn't fool ourselves. The people who write it, the staff, the Human Rights Council that oversees it, these people generally buy in to the one-sided narrative. And I don't think we should expect the report to be very fair, and we will respond to it.
The U.S. has had a change of posture during lately about Israel, getting to a point where it had menaced to withdraw its traditional support to Israel. And Netanyahu is talking in the Congress next week. What is going on between the U.S. and Israel? Do you think Israel is ruining its relation with the states? Or just exercising assertiveness?
No, I think we have to look back to how this began. In 2009, there were 2 elections. There was an election in Israel and an election in the United States. And both of the individuals who were elected saw a mandate that in some ways was that had a different trajectory. You had Netanyahu, who was elected to replace Olmert. Olmert had made a very large offer to Abbas. Abbas walked away. He didn't try to negotiate. He was offered almost the whole West Bank, half of Jerusalem, basically everything they said they wanted, and he didn't respond. He didn't say, yes, but. He left the table. And Netanyahu was elected in response to that. So Netanyahu was elected to take a more stronger stance for Israel. Obama was elected to, as he saw it, to be the anti-Bush. If Bush was doing wars in Iraq, we're going to end all wars. And if Bush was very pro-Israel, I'm going to be less pro-Israel. And so you had two people, one going in a direction of a more assertive, as you said, Israeli position, and then you had Obama going in a position that was, he said in his early days, that he wanted to show more daylight between America and Israel. He said it's better that we show more distance, that we not be seen as so close. And so you had this divergence of views. Netanyahu was a conservative in his mindset. Obama is a progressive, a liberal in his mindset. So in a number of areas, you had a divergence. Obama believes in reaching out to enemies like Iran and believing that he can change them. And Israel does not believe that. It's important to note, some people have criticized Netanyahu for damaging the relationship, and maybe some of the criticism is legitimate. I don't know. But what's important to note is it's not only Israel that has significant disagreements with this American administration. The many other of America's allies, the Egyptians, the Saudis, are outraged at this administration. Saudi Arabia canceled its seat on this Security Council, saying, and they said why? They said, we're outraged at what America is doing by reaching out to Iran and by not taking a stand on Syria. And so the Saudis are outraged at the Americans. The Egyptian regime turned to Soviets, to the Russians rather, to now give them arms, and they are also outraged at Obama. So many of America's traditional allies in the region have very difficult relationships with America. And so there may be some criticism due to Netanyahu, but it seems that there's a larger problem that has to do with some of the policy positions about, as some people say there's an appearance, there's the impression that this administration is nicer to America's enemies and less supportive of its traditional friends. There's the appearance that America is reaching out to Iran and is doing a major reconciliation with Iran at the expense of their allies. So I think it is in a difficult situation, and Netanyahu is meant to speak in early March in Washington, and if he does speak at the Congress and Democrats are not there, it could be very embarrassing.
And Iran is now going nuclear, and it is funding Hamas and Hezbollah, and what is the UN going to do about it, or is it doing something about it?
Well, the United Nations on this issue has done very little. They did impose some sanctions on Iran. There is a Security Council resolution saying that Iran is prohibited from exporting arms. So it's against international law, against the United Nations Security Council resolution for Iran to export arms to Hamas and Hezbollah, and yet, of course, they do so. Regrettably, the United Nations has done very little to enforce this. We have peacekeepers from the 2006 war, Europeans, many of them, Spanish, who are now there, Italians, and they were meant to enforce the peace, to disarm Hezbollah. They haven't done any of that. Hezbollah has 100,000 rockets. They haven't done anything to stop Hamas. So when it comes to terrorist groups and Iran supporting them, the United Nations has done very little or next to nothing. And that's contrary to what the United Nations is supposed to stand for. And some of its own resolutions that speak out against financing and supporting terrorism, but they don't live up to their own principles.
Do you think Israel has done mistakes in the UN arena, and do you think they should do something, or maybe they shouldn't bother to do anything because anyway it's like a lost battle?
No, I think it's the United Nations is the world arena, and Israel cannot escape the world arena. On the contrary, Israel wanted to be there and have its seat at the world arena. And Abba Eban fought very hard in 1948, and before that in 47, to get the partition resolution, and then to get Israel admitted to the United Nations in 1949. These were very hard battles, and Israel needs to have its seat at the world body, at the Parliament of Nations. It doesn't mean that it has to participate in every commission of inquiry and every conference on racism. It can choose to stand away from certain conferences to expose them as illegitimate. But fundamentally, Israel needs to be at the United Nations. It needs to make its case. The United Nations reflects the world that we have. We have a world where there are terrorists around the world. There are countries that support them. There are countries that do political deals and financial deals with them. A lot of the positions in South America, in Central America, that support these Arab regimes are doing so for oil and for trade, and they say so. People know that. That's why they vote at the UN for them. And that's the world that we live in, and the United Nations reflects that. So there's no escape for Israel to go and hide and bury its head in the sand. The United Nations is there. Israel has to go. It has a chance to use the stage and make its case, but at the same time to be aware that the instruments and the props of international law with the logo of the United Nations in a big assembly and the language of international law are being abused to cast Israel as some criminal when that's not the case. And Israel has to be aware when to try to fight that. So I think it has to strike a delicate balance, to be present at the United Nations, to have people who are articulate, who are intelligent, who know how to make its case. And to reach out to the world. Israel can also cooperate with other nations on agriculture and other areas of cooperation, development in Africa, and that is a role for Israel as well. So the United Nations is definitely a challenge. It's also an opportunity. And so one has to strike a balance between condemning UN decisions or UN officials that are biased, but also being present and making your case.